The clock struck 4 in the afternoon at Westfield Academy as students rushed out of classrooms, their expensive shoes clicking against the polished marble floors. The hallways buzzed with chatter about weekend plans, upcoming tests, and who was dating whom. No one noticed the woman in the gray uniform quietly pushing her cleaning cart along the wall, staying out of everyone's way. Elena Jackson kept her eyes down as she worked. At 45, she had mastered the art of being invisible. 3 years of working at this fancy private school had taught her that the less attention she drew to herself, the easier her job would be. The teachers walked past her as if she were just another piece of furniture. The students, dressed in their crisp uniforms that cost more than her monthly rent, barely registered her presence. "Excuse me," Eleanor said softly as a group of giggling teenagers blocked her path. They moved without looking at her, continuing their conversation as if the interruption had never happened. Eleanor pushed her cart forward, heading toward the music department. Monday afternoons meant cleaning the practice rooms, and she always saved the main music hall for last. The school's hallways were lined with photographs of successful alumni, doctors, lawyers, politicians, their smiling faces a reminder of what Westfield produced. Elena sometimes wondered if any of these privileged kids ever thought about the hands that cleaned their classrooms or wiped their fingerprints off the mirrors in the bathrooms. Her back ached as she bent down to pick up a crumpled paper someone had dropped. 20 years of physical work had left its mark on her body. Her hands, once smooth and delicate, were now rough with calluses. As she straightened up, she caught her reflection in one of the trophy cases. The young woman with dreams in her eyes was long gone, replaced by someone who had learned to expect less from life. Eleanor reached the music department and began her routine. She emptied trash bins, wiped down surfaces, and swept floors with practiced efficiency. The smaller practice rooms each held simple upright pianos, but it was the main music hall that housed the prize of Westfield Academy, a beautiful black Steinway grand piano that gleamed under the recessed lighting. When she entered the main hall, she was relieved to find it empty. This was her favorite part of the day. Setting her cleaning supplies aside, Eleanor walked over to the windows and opened them slightly. The late afternoon sun streamed in, casting long shadows across the room. The air smelled of linen polish and the faint, lingering scent of perfume from the day's students. Eleanor approached the piano, not to clean it yet, but to admire it. Her fingers hovered just above the keys, not touching but remembering. How many hours had she spent at pianos like this one, before life took a different turn? Sometimes, when no one was around, she would allow herself to imagine what might have been. A noise in the hallway startled her back to reality. Elena quickly moved away from the piano and grabbed her dusting cloth. She had learned her lesson 3 months ago when Mrs. Peterson, the history teacher, had walked in and found her standing too close to the piano. The suspicion in the woman's eyes had been clear. What business did the cleaning lady have with such an expensive instrument? Elena had been extra careful since then. As she dusted the piano's glossy surface, Elena hummed quietly to herself, a bit of Chopin, her mother's favorite. Music had been the center of their small home growing up. Her mother had cleaned houses during the day, but played like an angel in the evenings on their second-hand upright. "Music lives in our blood," she used to say. "No one can take that from you." The music hall would soon be filled with students rehearsing for the spring showcase. Elena needed to finish before they arrived. Victoria Harrington, the music teacher, made no effort to hide her annoyance when cleaning staff was still present during her rehearsals. The woman had a reputation for being demanding and cold, especially toward those she considered beneath her notice. Eleanor checked her watch. She had 30 minutes to finish before the students would start filing in. 30 minutes before she would once again press herself against the wall, trying to disappear as completely as possible while going about her work. 30 minutes of peace before facing the daily reminder of all she had given up. She never imagined that tomorrow, in this very room, everything would change. The next day arrived with a burst of spring sunshine that did nothing to warm Victoria Harrington's mood. She marched down the hallway of Westfield Academy with a stack of sheet music clutched to her chest, their heels clicking sharply against the floor. Students flattened themselves against lockers as she passed, knowing better than to get in her way when she had that look on her face. Victoria had been teaching music at Westfield for 15 years, building the program's reputation alongside her own. With perfectly styled blonde hair pulled into a tight bun and designer clothes that reminded everyone of her refined taste, she looked exactly like what she was, someone who had never known what it meant to struggle. "Miss Harrington," the school secretary called out as Victoria passed the main office. "Don't forget about the board meeting tonight. They want updates on the spring showcase." Victoria nodded curtly without stopping. The spring showcase was exactly what had her in such a foul mood. Every year, wealthy parents and potential donors filled the auditorium to witness the talents Westfield Academy nurtured. Every year, Victoria delivered a flawless performance that secured donations and enhanced her reputation. And this year, everything was falling apart. She pushed open the door to the music hall where a group of students already waited, instruments in hand. "Put those away," she snapped. "We're focusing on the piano solos today." The students exchanged nervous glances. Everyone knew about Ms. Harrington's prestigious background, the Juilliard education, her brief career as a concert pianist before she turned to teaching. They also knew her temper when things weren't perfect. "Where's Lily?" Victoria demanded, scanning the room. A timid boy near the front raised his hand. "She texted me. Still sick with the flu, Ms. Harrington." Victoria's face tightened. Lily Chen was supposed to perform the centerpiece of the showcase, a challenging Chopin piece that would impress the donors. The girl had been out sick for 3 days now. "We have less than 2 weeks," Victoria said, her voice dangerously low. "The headmaster has confirmed that the governor's wife will be attending. Do you understand what that means for this school? For this program?" What she didn't say was what it meant for her. Victoria had been promised consideration for the prestigious position of arts director if this year's donations exceeded expectations. The salary increase would finally allow her to buy the downtown condo she had her eye on for years. "Thomas, you'll have to take Lily's place if she doesn't return by Friday," she decided. The boy blanched. "But Miss Harrington, I haven't practiced that piece at all." "Then you'd better start now, hadn't you?" She cut him off, pointing to the grand piano. "The rest of you, back to the practice rooms. I need to work with Thomas alone." As the students scattered, Victoria felt a headache building behind her eyes. Everything had to be perfect. Her entire career at Westfield had been built on perfection. The practice session with Thomas went as poorly as she'd expected. The boy had talent but lacked confidence, and the Chopin piece demanded both technical skill and emotional depth. After an hour of increasingly tense instruction, even Victoria had to admit it wasn't working. "Take a break," she sighed, massaging her temples. "Get some water and we'll try again." As Thomas gratefully escaped the room, Victoria noticed movement near the back door. The janitor had slipped in and was quietly emptying the trash bins, her gray uniform blending into the shadows. Victoria had seen her around the school but had never bothered to learn her name. The woman was careful to stay out of the way, but her presence irritated Victoria nonetheless. "Could you come back later?" Victoria called out sharply. "We're in the middle of important rehearsals." The janitor nodded apologetically. "Sorry, ma'am. I'll just finish this bin and be on my way." Something about the woman's quiet dignity made Victoria's irritation spike further. The janitor moved to the last bin near the piano just as Thomas returned, looking no more confident than when he'd left. From the beginning, Victoria instructed him, trying to keep the frustration from her voice. Thomas positioned his hands over the keys and began to play. The mistakes started immediately. Missed notes, poor timing, no feeling whatsoever. Victoria's headache intensified with each error. Out of the corner of her eye, she noticed the janitor pause in her work. The woman was listening, her head slightly tilted, her eyes drifting to the boy's finger placement. For the briefest moment, Victoria thought she saw the janitor's fingers move slightly at her side, as if playing along with the music. An idea formed in Victoria's mind, mean-spirited and born entirely of frustration. The spring showcase was in jeopardy. Her promotion was at risk. And here was this woman, this nobody, seemingly critiquing a performance she couldn't possibly understand. As Thomas hit a particularly jarring wrong note, Victoria held up her hand to stop him. "That's enough," she said, a cold smile forming on her lips as she turned toward the janitor. "Perhaps we need a different perspective. You seem quite interested in our rehearsal. Why don't you show us how it's done?" The music hall fell silent. Elena stood frozen, the trash bag still in her hand, as every pair of eyes in the room turned toward her. She had been so careful all these years to blend into the background, to become part of the furniture. Now Miss Harrington was deliberately dragging her into the spotlight. "I'm sorry," Eleanor managed to say, hoping she had misheard. Victoria Harrington's smile didn't reach her eyes. "Since you seem so interested in our rehearsal, perhaps you'd like to show us how this piece should be played." She gestured to the gleaming grand piano. "Unless, of course, you're only qualified to empty trash cans." A few students shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Others watched with a mixture of curiosity and second-hand embarrassment. Thomas, still seated at the piano bench, looked relieved that attention had shifted away from his mistakes. Eleanor carefully set down her trash bag. "I'm just doing my job, ma'am. I didn't mean any disrespect." "No disrespect taken," Victoria said with false sweetness. "I'm simply offering you a chance to contribute to our musical education. You're watching quite intently. I thought perhaps you had some expertise to share." The sarcasm was unmistakable. Eleanor felt heat rising to her cheeks. She had worked at Westfield Academy for 3 years without incident, carefully maintaining her distance, keeping her past locked away. Now this woman was trying to humiliate her for sport. At that moment, the door to the music hall opened, and Headmaster Richardson walked in. In his late 50s with salt and pepper hair and kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses, he was well liked by students and staff alike. He paused, taking in the unusual scene. "Miss Harrington, I was hoping to discuss the program for the showcase, but I see you're in the middle of something." He glanced at Eleanor with mild confusion. Victoria straightened her posture. "Perfect timing, Headmaster." "I was just inviting." She paused, realizing she didn't know the janitor's name. "Eleanor Jackson," Eleanor supplied quietly. "Yes, Miss Jackson," Victoria continued smoothly. "I was inviting her to demonstrate her musical talents for our students. A bit of impromptu cultural enrichment." The headmaster frowned slightly, sensing something was off, but he simply nodded and moved to the back of the room. "Don't let me interrupt." Eleanor stood rooted to the spot, a war raging inside her. She could refuse, walk away with what little dignity she had left. That would be the safer choice, the smarter choice. But something about Victoria Harrington's smug expression made her blood boil. 20 years of disappearing, of making herself small, of setting aside her dreams, all of it crashed over her in a wave. "Well?" Victoria prompted. Students were beginning to whisper among themselves. One girl had taken out her phone, likely to record what promised to be an entertaining disaster. Eleanor took a deep breath and walked toward the piano. Thomas quickly stood up, vacating the bench. As she passed him, he whispered a quiet sorry that only she could hear. The bench felt foreign beneath her. How long had it been since she'd sat before an instrument of this quality? Her apartment held a battered upright piano she'd found at a thrift store, nothing like this masterpiece of craftsmanship. The keys gleamed like perfect teeth, waiting for her touch. Her hands hovered above them, suddenly unsure. They were work-worn now, the nails cut short and practical, calluses where soft skin used to be. These were not the hands of a pianist anymore. "We're waiting," Victoria said impatiently. "Unless you've changed your mind." Eleanor looked up and caught the eye of a young girl in the front row. The girl looked embarrassed by the whole situation, her eyes full of sympathy. It reminded Eleanor of herself at that age, before she learned how the world really worked, before doors closed in her face one by one. In that moment, something hardened inside Eleanor. She placed her fingers on the keys. The feel of cool ivory beneath her fingertips sent a shiver of recognition through her body, like greeting an old friend after years apart. Victoria had left the sheet music open to Chopin's Balladno, one in G minor, one of the most technically challenging pieces in the piano repertoire. Eleanor recognized it immediately. Her mother had played it often. "This piece is quite difficult," Victoria said loudly, addressing the students. "It requires years of training to master. But perhaps Ms. Jackson would like to play something simpler. Chopsticks, perhaps." A few students laughed nervously. Eleanor's fingers remained on the keys. She closed her eyes briefly, remembering her mother's words, "Music lives in our blood. No one can take that from you." When she opened her eyes again, she looked directly at Victoria Harrington for the first time. "I know this piece," she said quietly. And then, without further hesitation, she began to play. The first notes floated through the air like tentative questions. Elena's fingers moved gently across the keys, reacquainting themselves with their old friends. For a brief moment, Victoria's lips curled into a satisfied smirk, ready to witness the stumbling disaster she had anticipated. But then something changed. Elena's hands found their memory. Her back straightened, her shoulders relaxed, and suddenly the music poured out of her like water breaking through a dam. The opening section of Chopin's Ballade No. 1 flowed with a gentle sadness that caught everyone by surprise. Victoria's smirk faded. She blinked rapidly, as if trying to reconcile what she was seeing with what she had expected. The students sat up straighter in their chairs, phones forgotten in their hands as they stared at the woman in the gray janitor's uniform. As Eleanor moved into the more complex sections of the piece, her fingers danced across the keys with growing confidence. Years melted away. She was no longer in a room full of strangers intent on mocking her. She was back in the practice rooms of her youth, where possibilities had seemed endless. Thomas watched with his mouth slightly open. The girl in the front row had tears forming in her eyes. Even the headmaster had taken a step forward, drawn by the unexpected beauty filling his school's music hall. Eleanor played with technical precision that came from thousands of hours of practice, but it was the emotion she poured into the music that truly captivated her audience. Each note carried the weight of her unfulfilled dreams, her quiet dignity in the face of daily dismissal, and most surprisingly, a lack of bitterness that could have easily consumed someone with her talents who had been relegated to cleaning floors. The piece built toward its thunderous middle section. Eleanor's hands moved faster, attacking the keys with a controlled passion that made the expensive piano sing as it rarely had before, even under the touch of celebrated performers. Her body swayed slightly with the rhythm, completely lost in the music now. She had forgotten where she was, forgotten the cruel setup, forgotten everything except the conversation between her soul and the piano. A student in the back row was recording everything on his phone. Another had tears streaming down her face. Victoria stood perfectly still, her face drained of color as she watched 20 years of musical training being demonstrated by the woman she had tried to humiliate just minutes before. The piece entered its final section, and Eleanor brought it home with a delicate touch that made the notes seem to hang in the air like the last raindrops after a storm. When the final chord faded into silence, no one moved. No one even seemed to breathe. Eleanor slowly lifted her hands from the keys. The spell broke. She blinked, suddenly remembering where she was and what had just happened. She looked down at her hands as if they belonged to someone else, then quickly stood up from the bench. The silence lasted for 3 more seconds before the girl in the front row began to clap. Others joined instantly, and within moments the entire room erupted in applause. Several students rose to their feet. The headmaster was clapping harder than anyone, a look of astonishment and delight on his face. Only Victoria remained motionless, her arms crossed tightly over her chest, her complexion ashen. That was incredible," Thomas stammered, approaching Eleanor with wide eyes. "Where did you learn to play like that?" Eleanor smoothed down her uniform, uncomfortable with the attention. "I used to study music," she said simply, "a long time ago." "Used to?" the headmaster asked, walking forward. "Miss Jackson, that was a professional-level performance. Conservatory training." Eleanor nodded slightly. "Curtis Institute for a while." A murmur went through the students. The Curtis Institute of Music was one of the most prestigious conservatories in the world, with an acceptance rate lower than Harvard or Yale. "I don't understand," Victoria finally spoke, her voice tight. "If you were trained at Curtis, why are you?" She gestured vaguely at Eleanor's uniform, unable to finish the question. Eleanor looked at her steadily. "Life doesn't always go as planned, Miss Harrington." Then she turned, walked back to her cleaning cart, and began to push it toward the door. The students parted to let her through, staring at her with new eyes. "Miss Jackson," the headmaster called after her. "Please wait." Eleanor paused at the door. "I need to finish my rounds, sir. I'm already behind schedule because of this interruption." As she stepped into the hallway, she could hear the buzz of excited voices behind her. The sound of her private world colliding with her public one. For better or worse, Eleanor Jackson was no longer invisible. Eleanor closed the door of her small apartment and leaned against it, finally allowing the shaking to take over her body. The events of the day played over and over in her mind. She hadn't touched a piano like that, hadn't played for an audience in 20 years. And now everyone at Westfield knew. She moved to the kitchen on unsteady legs and poured herself a glass of water. The clock on the microwave showed 7:30 p.m. She'd left work early for the first time since taking the job, claiming illness. Headmaster Richardson hadn't argued, just looked at her with new eyes, eyes that actually saw her. In the corner of her living room sat her old piano, the one possession she'd never been able to part with despite everything. The upright Baldwin was scratched and worn, rescued from a church basement sale for $200 8 years ago. It wasn't in the best shape, but she kept it tuned religiously, spending money she could barely afford twice a year. Eleanor sat down on the bench and placed her hands on the familiar keys. They felt different from the glossy perfection of the Steinway at school, but they were hers. She began to play softly, letting her fingers find the same Chopin piece from earlier. As she played, her mind drifted back to another life. She had been just 22 when she was accepted to Curtis. Growing up in a working-class neighborhood in Philadelphia, Eleanor had been lucky to have a mother who recognized her talent early. Rose Jackson cleaned houses for wealthy families and occasionally brought Eleanor along. In one of those homes was a piano, and 5-year-old Eleanor had been drawn to it like a magnet. "The girl has a gift," the homeowner had told Rose after hearing Eleanor pick out a tune by ear. That comment led to lessons with a retired music teacher who charged next to nothing when she recognized Eleanor's rare talent. By 16, Eleanor was winning local competitions. By 18, she had a scholarship to a state university's music program. And by 22, she had been accepted to Curtis for graduate studies, a dream beyond anything she had imagined possible. Eleanor's fingers stumbled on the keys as she remembered what came next. Her mother's diagnosis, stage 4 cancer. The doctors gave her 6 months, but Rose Jackson was nothing if not a fighter. She lasted 2 years. 2 years during which Eleanor tried to balance her studies with caring for her dying mother. "Don't you dare quit," Rose would tell her. "This music is your inheritance. I didn't have chances like this, but you do." Eleanor kept going, practicing late into the night after her mother fell asleep. But the medical bills mounted, and the small scholarship that supplemented her Curtis Fellowship wasn't enough. She took a job waiting tables, then another as a night security guard. Her performances began to suffer. Her professors noticed. Then came the morning she'd never forget. She arrived for her lesson with Professor Winters to find him speaking with the department head. They'd both looked uncomfortable. "Eleanor, we need to discuss your status," Professor Winters had said. "Your performance in the last recital was, well, below our standards." "I know it wasn't my best," she had admitted. "I've been dealing with some personal issues, but I'm working through them." The department head cleared his throat. "We've decided that perhaps Curtis isn't the right fit for you at this time. Sometimes talent needs time to mature." But Eleanor had seen the truth in their eyes. Other students had bad performances. Other students got second chances, but not everyone. Not her. 2 weeks later, her fellowship was revoked. The next month, her mother died. Within a year, Eleanor had sold almost everything to pay off the medical debts. The only thing she couldn't bear to part with was her mother's wedding ring and her own piano dreams. Life became a series of jobs: receptionist, call center operator, retail clerk. Nothing lasted. She moved between apartments as rent increased, between cities as opportunities dried up. Eventually, she landed at Westfield Academy, grateful for steady work with benefits, even if it meant invisibility. Eleanor stopped playing and wiped tears from her face. 20 years of burying her music, of pretending that part of her life had never existed. And now, because of Victoria Harrington's cruelty, everyone knew. Her phone buzzed on the kitchen counter. Eleanor ignored it. It had been buzzing all afternoon. Unknown numbers, probably students who had somehow found her contact information. The video must be circulating by now. The thought made her stomach clench. She closed the piano lid gently and stood up. Tomorrow, she would face the consequences of being seen. Tonight, she needed rest. As she headed toward her bedroom, the phone buzzed once more. This time, Elena glanced at the screen. It was a text from a number she recognized, Headmaster Richardson. "Ms. Jackson, we need to talk. Please call me when you can." The next morning, Eleanor almost called in sick. Her hand hovered over her phone for a full minute before she set it down with a sigh. Running away wouldn't solve anything. Better to face whatever waited for her at Westfield head-on. As she drove into the school parking lot, Eleanor noticed something odd. Students were looking at her car, an old Honda that had never attracted attention before. A few pointed. One waved. Elena gripped the steering wheel tighter, her knuckles turning white. "Just get through the day," she whispered to herself. "Just get through the day." She parked in her usual spot at the far end of the lot and grabbed her worn backpack. As she walked toward the service entrance she always used, a voice called out, "Ms. Jackson." Elena turned to see Thomas, the piano student from yesterday, jogging toward her. He was smiling broadly, holding his phone out like it was evidence of something important. "You're famous," he said, slightly out of breath. "The video has over 50,000 views already." Elena felt the blood drain from her face. "Video?" Thomas nodded eagerly. "From yesterday. Pete recorded the whole thing on his phone. It's everywhere. Instagram, TikTok, YouTube. People are going crazy over it." Elena closed her eyes briefly. This was worse than she'd imagined. She'd expected whispers in the hallway, maybe some awkward questions, not internet fame. "Look," Thomas continued, oblivious to her distress. He held up his phone, showing her a video titled Janitor Shashovsky Case Stuck-Up Teacher with Incredible Piano Skills. The view count was actually closer to 70,000. That's not a very nice title," Eleanor managed. Thomas frowned slightly. "Yeah, I guess not, but the comments are amazing. Professional pianists are asking who you are. There's even one from a professor at Juilliard who says your interpretation of Chopin is revelatory, whatever that means." Before Eleanor could respond, more students approached, forming a small crowd around her. Their faces were eager, curious, respectful in a way they had never been before. One girl asked if Eleanor would sign her sheet music. Another asked where she had studied. A boy wanted to know if she could teach him to play like that. Eleanor felt overwhelmed. For 3 years, these same students had walked past her without a glance. Now they looked at her like she was someone special. Their attention felt both flattering and frightening. "I'm going to be late for work," she said, gently pushing through the crowd. "Excuse me." As she hurried toward the building, she spotted Victoria Harrington getting out of her B&I. Their eyes met across the parking lot. Victoria quickly looked away, her face tight with what might have been embarrassment or anger. Elena wasn't sure which. Inside the building, things weren't any easier. Staff members who had never spoken to her now smiled and nodded. The school secretary actually stood up when Eleanor passed the office. "Headmaster Richardson would like to see you when you have a moment," she said warmly. "No rush, whenever you're ready." Elena nodded, wondering what the headmaster wanted. Probably to ask her to keep a low profile, or worse, to let her go for disrupting the school's routine. Maybe they saw her as a liability now, the viral janitor who embarrassed a teacher. She went to the supply closet to get her cart, trying to stick to her normal routine. But as she pushed the cart down the hallway toward her first cleaning assignment, she noticed something odd. The floor was already clean. So were the windows. In the girls' bathroom, the trash had been emptied and fresh paper towels stocked. "I did your morning section," a voice said behind her. Eleanor turned to find Larry, one of the other maintenance workers. He was an older man who'd never shown much interest in talking to her before. "You did what?" Eleanor asked, confused. Larry shrugged. "Figured you'd be busy today. What with everyone wanting to talk to you and all." "You didn't have to do that," Eleanor said. "Wanted to," Larry smiled slightly. "Never knew we had a celebrity on staff." Eleanor felt her cheeks warm. "I'm not a celebrity. I just play piano." "My daughter plays," Larry said, surprising her further. In 3 years, he'd never mentioned having children. "Not like you, though. She's taking lessons at the community center. Maybe someday you could give her some tips." Before Eleanor could answer, her phone buzzed. It was another text from Headmaster Richardson. "Ms. Jackson, please come to my office at your earliest convenience. Important matter to discuss." Eleanor took a deep breath. Whatever was coming, there was no avoiding it now. Her days of invisibility were over. For better or worse, people at Westfield Academy finally saw her. All of her. "I need to go see the headmaster," she told Larry, her voice steadier than she felt. "Good luck," he said, giving her a small nod of encouragement. Eleanor left her cart and walked toward the administrative wing, straightening her uniform as she went. For the first time in years, she held her head high as she moved through the halls of Westfield Academy. Eleanor knocked on the headmaster's door, her heart beating so loudly she was sure he could hear it from inside his office. "Come in," called Headmaster Richardson. Taking a deep breath, Eleanor opened the door. To her surprise, the headmaster wasn't alone. A tall woman with silver-streaked hair sat in one of the chairs facing his desk. Next to her was a younger man in a neat suit, holding a leather portfolio. "Ms. Jackson, thank you for coming," the headmaster said, standing to greet her. "Please, have a seat." He gestured to the empty chair beside the visitors. Eleanor sat down nervously, smoothing her uniform. "Am I in trouble, sir?" The headmaster smiled. "Quite the opposite, actually. Allow me to introduce Patricia Walker, the chairwoman of our school board, and David Chen, the director of the Philadelphia Community Music Program." Eleanor shook their hands, confusion evident on her face. "Ms. Jackson," Patricia began, "your performance yesterday was extraordinary. I've watched the video at least 5 times. My husband, who studied at Berklee College of Music, says he's rarely heard Chopin played with such emotional depth." "Thank you," Eleanor said quietly, still uncertain where this was heading. David Chen leaned forward. "Ms. Jackson, the community music program serves talented students from all backgrounds across the city. We've been looking for a piano instructor with both technical skills and the ability to connect with our students. After seeing your video, I believe you would be perfect for the position." Eleanor blinked, trying to process what she was hearing. "You're offering me a job? Teaching piano?" "Yes," David nodded. "It would be part-time initially, 2 afternoons a week and Saturday mornings. The pay is modest but fair, $60 per hour." Eleanor did a quick calculation in her head. That was nearly twice what she earned as a janitor for fewer hours. "We'd also like to offer you a position here at Westfield," Headmaster Richardson added. "We're creating a new community outreach program, making our facilities and faculty accessible to promising students who couldn't otherwise afford Westfield. We'd like you to teach piano as part of that initiative." Eleanor felt like she was dreaming. "But I don't have a teaching certificate or—" "Your Curtis training and obvious talent are more than sufficient," Patricia interrupted gently. "What you demonstrated yesterday shows not only technical mastery, but a profound understanding of music that can't be taught." The headmaster cleared his throat. "There's something else you should know. After yesterday's incident, the board had a lengthy discussion with Ms. Harrington." Eleanor tensed. "I never meant to cause problems." "You didn't," Patricia assured her. "Ms. Harrington's behavior was completely unacceptable. She's been placed on probation and will be required to take sensitivity training. She's also been removed from her position as head of the music department." Eleanor wasn't sure how to feel about that. Despite everything, she took no pleasure in Victoria's humiliation. "What about my current job?" she asked practically. "I need steady income and benefits." "We understand," the headmaster nodded. "You could maintain your position with reduced hours if you wish, or transition fully into teaching as the program grows. Either way, we'll ensure your benefits remain intact." Eleanor's mind raced with possibilities. After 20 years of just getting by, of burying her talent and her dreams, doors were suddenly opening. "May I have some time to think about it?" she asked. "Of course," David replied, handing her his card. "But I hope you'll say yes. There are children who could benefit enormously from your guidance." As the meeting concluded and Eleanor stood to leave, Patricia touched her arm. "Miss Jackson, might I ask, why did you stop playing? With your talent, you could have had a remarkable career." Eleanor hesitated, then decided on the simple truth. "Life got in the way. My mother fell ill. I needed to work. And sometimes," she paused, "sometimes the world isn't ready to see certain people succeed in certain spaces." Understanding passed between the women. Patricia nodded slowly. "Well, I believe it's finally your time. Better late than never." Walking back through the hallways of Westfield, Eleanor felt lighter than she had in years. Near the music hall, she passed Victoria Harrington, who was carrying a box of personal items from her office. Their eyes met briefly. Victoria looked away first, but not before Eleanor caught a glimpse of something unexpected, not hatred or anger, but a kind of begrudging respect. Outside the music hall, Thomas and a group of students were waiting for her. "Ms. Jackson," he called, "we've been looking for you everywhere. We have a favor to ask." "What is it?" Eleanor asked, smiling despite herself at their enthusiasm. "Will you play with us at the spring showcase? Please? We've already talked to Headmaster Richardson, and he loves the idea." Eleanor looked at their hopeful faces, children who yesterday wouldn't have noticed her if she'd been on fire, now looking at her with admiration. She thought about her mother, about the dreams she'd set aside, about second chances coming when you least expect them. "Yes," she said finally, "I'd be honored to play with you." And for the first time in 20 years, Eleanor Jackson felt like she was exactly where she belonged.